Hi everyone. In this video, I'll show you how I renovated a room with my own hands, from demolition to the final result. It was a long and challenging process, but in the end, we got exactly what we wanted. This is how the room looked in the very beginning. The first thing I did was remove the old wooden windows. They were fixed with long nails, so I had to use a hammer drill. I worked carefully, removing all the old mortar to make the openings wider. After that, I called a measurer. As a result, the windows became 10 centimeters wider and 15 centimeters taller, and the doorway became 5 centimeters wider and 15 centimeters taller. Thanks to this, much more light started coming into the room. The ceiling gave me the most trouble. There were cracks and areas where the old plaster was falling off. I scraped everything off with a spatula and sandpaper, then primed it and started plastering. It didn't turn out perfectly. I had to repeat the process over and over again. In some areas, I did it up to 5 times, plastering, sanding with a machine, and plastering again. In the end, the ceiling became more or less even. We decided to make the windowsill out of oak. At the store, they cut the boards to the right size, and at home, I glued them together to make it thicker and also made a threshold for the balcony. I sanded and smoothed the surface, then painted it several times and finished it with varnish. We installed everything with adhesive foam, but first I filled the big gaps with mortar. It was very important to set the windowsill and thresholds perfectly level. In the end, we made a threshold both inside the room and for the balcony. Now it's much more comfortable to walk. And that's the first part of the renovation. In the next video, I'll show you the continuation, installing slopes, working on the walls, adding electrical wiring, and refinishing the floor. If you're interested, don't miss part 2, and feel free to ask questions in the comments. This is how the ceiling looked after the main cleaning. Later, I still found a few more spots that needed to be scraped off. And after priming, even more appeared. I thought it would never end. Here you can see the installed window and door units. The double-glazed windows have 2 panes and a wide profile. After installing the windows, I had to trim the foam and remove the protective film. Why did I take it off right away? Because I once had a bad experience in another apartment. It's almost impossible to peel off the film after the windows have been standing in the sun for a long time. back to the ceiling again. After the cleaning, it was time to make it even. Of course, for this job, plaster and a couple of spatulas are the best helpers. I used ready-made plaster. It's much easier to work with, and surprisingly, it doesn't dry out quickly. If you close it well, it can be stored for months. The whole process, as you can see in the video, had to be repeated several times. The next day after plastering, I started sanding the ceiling. A drywall sander, the MAXXT R7202-F giraffe type, helped me a lot. Without it, the process would have been much more exhausting. The sander has its own vacuum system and dust collector, but I also tried connecting an external vacuum, thinking it would work better and more reliably. In the end, it turned out to be inconvenient, and the built-in vacuum on the machine was more than enough. Then the plastering process continued, followed by sanding again. While working with the plaster, I also decided to fix some problem areas on the walls. In one spot, I found a deep crack, and before plastering, I reinforced it with mesh to make it more reliable. Then it was time to work on the windowsill. The oak board was 2 centimeters thick, which is too thin for a windowsill. To make it stronger and look nicer, I glued 2 boards together so the windowsill became thicker and more solid. A day later, when the wood had dried, it was time for sanding and rounding the edges. For this, I used a Sill 1210 AA belt sander, along with different types of sandpaper to get a smooth finish. Here I'm just test fitting the windowsill in place. Looks pretty good so far. I did the same with the balcony threshold, sanding and gluing it. The threshold on the balcony itself was made from an old threshold. Everything seems to have turned out pretty well. Next, everything needed to be painted. My wife chose the color and painted several coats. Then, a day after painting, we applied several layers of varnish. Before installing the window sill and threshold, I mixed some cement mortar and filled the large gaps and holes. This made it much easier to level the sill and threshold during installation. Once the mortar had dried, I set up wooden guides to level the window sill and threshold. Then I applied adhesive foam and installed everything in place. This is the result of the windowsill and thresholds, as you can see in the video. That's the end of part 1. I hope you enjoyed it.